In this video, we will learn about the Murphy's Law. So the Murphy's Law states that anything that can go wrong will go wrong. If things are left to themselves, things always go from bad to worse. And if there's a possibility of several things going wrong, the one that will go wrong is the one that will cause the most damage. This law is named after Edward Murphy Jr., a US Air Force engineer who was consumed by designing airplanes. And as a matter of fact, as you also might guess, things did not usually go well as a general matter. Through a long series of failed tests and designs, he ended up proclaiming if there are two ways to do something and one of those ways will result in disaster, he'll do it that way. And so this eventually found its way to its current form of, within double quotes, anything that can go wrong will go wrong. And this subsequently sort of became a kind of warning among Air Force engineers and designers. So the Air Force's near spotless safety record can be attributed to its belief in the Murphy's Law and how it would encourage double checking information and testing rigorously for fail-safes and redundancies. Now there are two different viewpoints to this law. The first one is attributed this to be a psychological bias known as the confirmation bias, which means that we tend to remember when things go wrong and forget when things go right. Example, it always feels that whichever line we choose to stand in is moving slow as compared to all the other lines. But there's an alternative viewpoint which is much more actionable, and that's what we are going to focus on. And this alternative viewpoint is exactly what we stated, that anything that can go wrong will go wrong. And although this is somewhat pessimistic in approach, it can be interpreted as a form of entropy or a call to be prepared for the worst. So we should always remind ourselves that everything is subject to failure. Sometimes a failure represents a coincidence that simply couldn't have been prevented, but oftentimes a failure represents a systematic series of errors in which it was inevitable. Murphy's Law is behind all the fail-safes and backup plans and contingency plans of our world. It tells us to double check even when we are 99% sure about something. Let's take an example of a skydiver. What percentage of the time does a skydiver's parachute malfunction? Probably a very small percent of time. But I can bet you that you wouldn't jump out of an airplane using a parachute that hasn't been properly checked. To be fail-safe, a tested parachute is a pretty good idea. Having an extra parachute is an even better idea, and having the third one is equally as right. So if you keep Murphy's Law in mind, you can drastically change the way with which you approach certainty. Always ask yourself that what are the small cracks in which Murphy's Law could take hold? What truly needs confirmation or verification? And what parts of my plan am I quietly hoping that it will be good enough to get by? So always plan for the worst case scenario and seek to avoid what you don't want as opposed to aiming towards what you do want.